All right. Well, hi everyone. My name is Michael Maidaa. I am one of the third year urology residents here at the University of Florida, Department of Urology. Thank you so much for having me. I actually had never really heard of the Medi-Gators until one of my co-residents was not able to do a presentation, so she sent it over to me, and I was able to kind of take that slot. My plan for today, sorry, I apologize. I don't have any like PowerPoint presentation or anything like that. My plan was to kind of just discuss a little bit about my whole journey of getting into medicine, a little bit about undergrad and the process of getting into medical school, things I did, and then like at the end, I would like to leave quite a bit of time for questions in case, you know, people have questions about a specific aspect of something that I discussed. Especially these days, everybody has a kind of different path towards ending up in healthcare. Not everyone's the typical traditional student that knows exactly what they want to do from day one and takes the typical path to, you know, becoming, whether it be a PA, NP, MD, whatever it may be. So that'll kind of leave a little bit of time for questions at the end. So briefly about myself, I'll kind of start with undergrad. I am originally from California. I was born and raised in LA area, Burbank specifically, and attended undergrad at the University of California in Santa Barbara. I was a biology major. I did kind of know early on that I wanted to go into medicine. I didn't know specifically, you know, what specialty or anything like that, but I did have a pretty good idea. And the reason I chose biology as my major was because it kind of satisfied a lot of the prerequisites for getting into medical school, as well as, I mean, consisted of classes that I enjoyed in high school. I knew that I had to kind of build up my app if I wanted to be competitive for medical school. And this was, I guess I graduated undergrad in 2013, and even then it was super competitive. Now it's even more competitive from what I've heard. So even then, you know, we wanted to really focus on becoming the best possible applicant in order to even have a chance of getting into med school. So some of the things that I did, one of which was research, and my recommendation in that regard is kind of figure out if there's anything specific that you're interested in, and then look up different, you know, professors that may be doing research, professors, physicians, whatever it may be, that's doing research in that field or specialty, and, you know, send them an email. Networking is really the main way to get research positions. It's not really like how qualified you are necessarily, but it's more of who you know and how hardworking you are and how many people you reach out to. So I actually did research in ecology. I was looking at like flies and larvae and things like that, which has nothing really to do with what I'm doing now, obviously. But it's really just exposure and something else on your resume. I also did some volunteering at local hospitals and nursing homes, just to kind of get a little bit of exposure to medicine in the healthcare field, as well as adding volunteering to my resume. I think what is important when it comes to volunteering is not necessarily how many different volunteer gigs you have, but they really like seeing that you spent a lot of time with one specific program or, you know, volunteer organization and learned something from it, grew as a person from that experience, and then it becomes something that you can include, you know, in your personal statement or in your application. Because if you just say, oh, you know, I did an hour here with this group, I did an hour there, and it's not really a meaningful enough experience for you to include in like a personal statement or something. So if you do volunteering, I suggest, looking for quality experiences that you can extend throughout undergrad, which is what I did. And then finally, I think shadowing is important, not only for building your resume necessarily, but to figure out if you even want to do this. So, I mean, some people, put in their head that they want to be a doctor or a PA or whatever it may be, and then they spend, a month shadowing somebody that does that job and then realize, actually, this does not sound like what I thought it was. It's not like what I'm seeing in the TV shows or, whatever. And I don't want to do that. So that's really important to find out, because going into healthcare, not only, MD, but all aspects of healthcare is a pretty big sacrifice. With schooling, moving to different places, applying, it's expensive. It takes a big toll on your personal, social life and just in general. So it's really good to know before you make such a big commitment that it's even something that you want to do. So that was kind of my undergrad experience. After, I got to the point where I was graduating and getting ready to apply and everything, I felt pretty confident, that I was gonna get into a bunch of medical schools and things like that. I was like, well, I did everything they told me to. I did well in school. I did research. I did volunteering. I honors this, honors that. Everything that they told me I needed to do to be a doctor. Then I regardless decided to take a gap year just so I could beef up my app a little bit more. And in that gap year, I basically did a little bit more research. And also, I was a tutor for the Princeton Review. So I kind of wanted to do something where I would actually get paid as well. I got tired of just volunteering and never making money my whole life. So I reached out to the Princeton Review, and I ended up being a SAT and MCAT tutor, where I would teach a few classes a week in different areas around where I lived in LA at the time, and then decided to apply. So the application process is a pretty tedious process. Every school that you apply to, at least when I applied, there are secondary applications involved. So you spend the money, you write your application, then they send you an email saying, oh, here's another application specifically for our school for you to fill out. And you're doing this, for 30, I did it for like 33 schools, I think is what I applied to, something like that. So it's very tedious. And I went through that whole process, ended up getting 2 interviews that first time that I applied, one of them in New York and one of them in Wisconsin, I think it was, and ended up getting waitlisted at both of those programs and not getting in. So I went my whole life where everything had seemingly come fairly easy to me, where I was like, oh, I work hard, I do well, things work out. I got into undergrad, I did my research, everything that I wanted to accomplish had worked out. And then all of a sudden, I hit this, huge, humbling roadblock where I thought for sure I'd get into medical school, and I did everything I needed to, and I had failed. And that was a kind of I don't want to be dramatic, but it was a little bit of a life-changing experience for me, because I had gone through all this and that whole year of applying and going on interviews and spending money and doing all that. And, you can't help but question, is this even worth it? Is it worth me going through all this again and reapplying? I mean, I already have a degree. I could do research in biology. I could teach. I really like teaching. I could, continue doing that. I could work for a pharmaceutical company. There was a lot of other things that I could have done potentially. Ultimately, though, I did decide to reapply. And in that following year, I will say I didn't do too much different. I kept doing research over at USC. I kept teaching at Kaplan, and I volunteered at a local, it's like a local nonprofit. It was called Meet Each Need with Dignity. And basically what I did was work as a English as a second language teacher for adults that recently immigrated to the States and didn't speak English and were trying to get jobs. So that was actually a really fun experience for me. It was one of the volunteering experiences that I enjoyed the most throughout my time. So, I mean, based on that, I don't think that I boosted my application very much in that extra year. That being said, I basically did the same thing again. I reapplied to a bunch of programs. I also applied to a bunch of DO schools. And then all of a sudden, I don't know why, I ended up getting a bunch of interviews all over the country and multiple acceptances at programs in several different states. I mean, it was what I was expecting the first time around, sort of, and then ended up not getting in anywhere. And then now when I was expecting, you know, potentially to go another cycle of not getting into medical school and giving up, it all worked out. So I don't really know. Maybe it's just partially a crapshoot where, I don't know, sorry if I'm not allowed to say that word, but there's some luck involved, I think. I think there's definitely some aspect of who's reading your application, what mood they're in at that time, what they're looking for in an applicant that year. I don't know exactly, but regardless, oh, I just saw one of the chat messages. Yeah, that. So for anyone that can't read it, it says maybe they saw your persistence. That's the only thing that I can really think of, is they saw somebody that went through the process of applying. They didn't get in. They clearly, you know, wanted to do everything in their power to succeed, and that's, you know, that's an attribute that is needed in medicine, that perseverance and, you know, willingness to overcome obstacles and things like that. So I don't know, maybe that's what they saw. Regardless, it worked out. And so that's what I did. Ended up going to, and I'll talk a little bit about med school, and that'll kind of, I think that'll probably be the last area that I discuss before I open it up to questions. So I ended up going to the University of Iowa for medical school, which, as a lot of you probably know, going from, you know, born and raised in Southern California and then going to undergrad on the beach for 4 years in perfect weather around friends and family, and then going to the Midwest for really the first time in my life. I never really had a reason to go to the Midwest, I guess. But I landed there, and it was summer when I first started. So this was August, and it was super hot and humid. I was like, okay, that's fine. I mean, I can deal with the heat. Until winter came around, and then that was the big shock for me. That was like the first time I had ever even seen snow falling from the sky, and little did I know it would be 6 months of that. So a big thing to consider is when we're applying to, you know, medical school, residency, whatever it may be, is a lot of times you don't have a huge say in where you end up. So it's a really big sacrifice, and it's something to keep in mind that, you know, you could end up somewhere thousands of miles away from friends and family in weather you've never experienced and a culture you've never experienced. So outside of the weather, also the way people did things there was totally different, in a good way, I will say. So I was used to, you know, the hustle and bustle of Los Angeles and everyone in traffic and yelling at each other and cussing and honking and everything. And then all of a sudden in Iowa, everyone's super nice to you. They don't even honk at you if you're on, if the light turns green and you wait 10 seconds, they still don't honk at you. So that was an interesting change for me. And then just walking down the hallways where people didn't just stare at the ground, they actually looked at you and waved hi, and even if you didn't know them. So small things like that really are what you realize when you go somewhere completely different than where you're used to growing up. So that was kind of the culture shock part of med school. The academic shock of med school, I think, is that you've gone through undergrad and you worked really hard in undergrad because you wanted to be a good applicant, but the volume of content that you have to learn in med school, it's like taking all of undergrad and then doing it in a semester. And so that was a huge shock for us. I mean, you go from, in undergrad being at the top of your class and having plenty of time to study and doing well, to now everybody is the same as you. So it was all the other people that were at the top of their class and did well in undergrad and got into med school. Now you are average all of a sudden, if not below average. And you're learning all this content and you're overwhelmed. And a lot of times, you're not near friends and family. You don't have a support system. You haven't really met anyone yet. You don't even have many friends. And it can be an overwhelming experience. So the reason I bring that up is for those of you that eventually go through that, don't feel alone. I have a younger cousin that just started med school, and she reached out to me, a couple weeks ago and was just doubting everything. She said, I don't know, this is not for me. I'm not smart enough to do this. I'm not capable. I'm too overwhelmed. This sucks. I should have never got into medicine. Did you feel like this? And I said, I felt the exact same way. And look where I am now. I mean, almost everybody that goes through that experience feels that same way at some point. And, most of us make it out just fine. So if you ever are feeling like that, I encourage you to reach out to people that have gone through it as well, because they're going to be the best kind of support, advice-giving, suggestion-giving people, because you'll reach out to friends and family that aren't in the medical field, and they just won't, if they haven't been through it, it's really hard for them to, one, even understand what you're going through, and two, say the right things that you actually want to hear. So my mom went through that quite a bit, where, I would reach out to her and I'd be overwhelmed, and she wouldn't really get why I felt the way I did, and she didn't really know, what advice to give me. But then I would reach out to other people that I knew that had went through this, and that reassurance of knowing that what I'm feeling is normal was really helpful to me. The last thing I'll talk about was picking a specialty. So I kind of knew that I wanted to do some sort of surgical subspecialty. I didn't know which one. Ultimately, I had done some research in urology in my gap year, kind of like I discussed. So I knew a little bit about that. I really liked ortho. I grew up playing sports. I really thought they did cool surgeries. I got along with a lot of the ortho residents. And I also considered plastic surgery. And ultimately what it came down to was I wanted the field that was the most diverse and had the most to offer in types of procedures and subspecialties and different things that I could do. So urology is cool because, we do robotic surgery, laparoscopic surgery, endoscopic surgery with scopes. We have all this high-tech equipment like lasers and different things like that. And we also do the big open oncology cases as well, open nephrectomies and cystectomies and things like that. So that ended up being what I chose. again, applied broadly. I think I applied to like 77 programs, which apparently for urology this year, I think that was below average for the average amount of programs applied to. And then ended up matching here, and it's been great. It's been tough. It's a lot of work. Residency is really, draining in a lot of different ways, but ultimately it's a very rewarding experience. And for the first time in all my training, I feel like I'm finally doing what I wanted to be doing all along. And it's a great feeling to be done with all of the kind of irrelevant prerequisite things that I've had to do over the last decade to get to this point, and finally be operating and doing what I really enjoy. So that's been a crazy ride. And I know my journey is different than other people's journey. And there's a bunch of different ways to get to where I got. So this isn't the only path to take, is what I'm trying to say. There's a lot of different ways to do this. This is just the way that I did it. So one more thing before I open it up to questions. I do have a quick plug that I'd like to make. So I recently started a YouTube channel where I discuss a little bit of my experience, similar to the things that I discussed today, but in a little more detail and specifics in regards to advice and suggestions for pre-med and med students. I have about 5 or 6 videos now and hoping to make several more. So I just wanted to share my screen here real quick and give you guys a second to check it out if you're interested. Okay, great. So I'll just leave this up for a second if you want to check it out. You can also follow me on Twitter. Feel free to DM me with any questions or whatever. I'm pretty sure you guys can find my email address somewhere as well, like on our department website or something. And with that, I'll kind of leave, open it up to questions. Anyone?
So it looks like there's a couple of questions coming into the chat.
Oh, okay. All right, great. Let me see. What ultimately convinced you to reapply after 7%? That's a good, so here, the first question here is, what ultimately convinced you to reapply after your first cycle of applications instead of pursuing one of the other paths you mentioned? I think part of it was I had already put so much time and effort and dedicated so much of my life to pursuing this career that it was really hard for me to kind of throw that all away and kind of have that feeling of starting over. I also had talked to a few physicians that had a similar experience and didn't get in that first time that they applied, and now are super successful, physicians and doing exactly what they want to do, and it all worked out for them. So that was a little encouraging. And I don't think I had necessarily a huge passion for those other paths that I mentioned. So I think it was a combination of those 3 things that really convinced me to give it another shot. But it was tough. I mean, it was a huge sacrifice. And risking going through all that all over again and feeling like I wasted another year of my life. So it was not an easy decision. I don't want to make it sound like it was easy. But that was ultimately what convinced me. Let's see what other questions we got here. Is residency hard in different ways as you advance from year to year? Yes. I think it's hard all along, but exactly like you said, it's hard in different ways. So when you first start as an intern, I think the part of the difficulty is, first of all, practicing in residency is completely different than what you learn in med school. So the typical textbook things that you learn in med school is not the day-to-day things that you see in residency. And they don't teach you how to, necessarily put in orders in the chart or order CT scans or, schedule follow-up with patients, write discharge instructions or medication reconciliation or working with social workers and nurses and, making longer-term game plans and things like that. So I think intern year, the struggle is figuring out how to be a doctor, period. And then being in a hospital that you probably have never worked in before, using a different EMR. So we use Epic here. Some other hospitals use a completely different system that you've never used before. So it's overwhelming in a lot of ways being an intern because you don't know anything, not even how to work the computer, and you're being asked to be, like a fully functioning, independent doctor. And I think that's the tough part of intern year. As you advance, it's not that it gets easier, it's just the things that I mentioned get easier, but then you start getting more autonomy. You start having to do more of the clinical decision making, the difficult discussions with patients, dealing with post-operative complications, being in the OR expected to know all the steps of the procedure and dealing with any complications or troubleshooting intraoperatively, studying for boards. So every year you're presented with a new set of challenges as you accomplish, different things, your expectations are higher. But I will say that I'm a third year now, so I still have 2 more years to go. I enjoy the struggles of third year more than I enjoy the struggles of intern year, because I feel like I'm getting closer and closer to, being ready to actually do what I'm training to do. All right, let's see. Okay, we got a few questions now. What are your plans for after residency? So right now what I'm doing is trying to decide whether or not I want to do a fellowship. Fellowships are becoming more and more popular these days. I think the obvious answer for why is that we just know so much more now than we used to. So every year these subspecialties, have new research, they have new technology, we learn new things. So what was in a medical textbook in 1950 would be like the total equivalent of 1 chapter in first aid now because of how much more we know. We used to have 1 antibiotic known to man or something, and then now we have sensitivities for every single bug and every single antibiotic that could potentially treat that bug. So fellowships now, for that reason, are becoming more common and almost necessary if you want to go into academics. I don't think I want to go into academics, but I do want to work in a hospital setting. I think I would like to do general urology, but I may still consider a fellowship if the job market is looking for a fellowship trained urologist in a specific field, or if I just wanted to get really good at one specific specialized operation. So that's the process that I'm in right now, is trying to decide whether or not to do a fellowship, and then ultimately would like to move back to Southern California around my family and friends and practice close to them, since I've kind of been away from them for almost a decade now. So those are my plans for now. We'll see if they change. Looks like we got 2 more questions. Did you take a gap year before your first application? And what And if so, what was your reasoning to deciding to do that? If not, what are your opinions on taking a gap year before professional school? So that's a good question. I will say that 2 weeks ago, I posted a video specifically on the gap year. I think I literally titled it Gap Year Before Medical School. So that's also on my YouTube channel if you want some more details. But I did take a gap year before applying and then didn't get in and then forced to take that second gap year. So basically one planned gap year and then another gap year after that. To answer your question on what my opinions are on it, I think it really depends. I think a gap year is a great way to, especially now that it's so competitive getting into medical school, it's a great way to boost your application and your resume, to network, meet some more people, and give you some more time to really solidify your application, write a good personal statement, potentially retake exams. So that's a great time to, if you didn't do so well on your MCAT your first time around, or whatever test, MCAT's not the only one, it gives you a chance to redo that test. If you are, I don't know, if you're, the kid genius that got a 4.0 all through, did a bunch of research, valedictorian, did all your prerequisites, killed your MCAT, and have your personal statement ready, then no, I guess you don't necessarily need to take a gap year. But from my experiences and seeing what people have been doing, it's pretty tough to be, confidently ready to be competitive without taking that gap year. So long answer, short, it depends on your situation and what you've done. I do have a lot more details in that video regarding what you can do in that gap year, so feel free to check that out. All right, let's see. I did not get in time. You ultimately know. Oh, okay. That wasn't really a question. Well, you're welcome. I'm happy to be here. I'm glad that I can kind of give you guys a little bit of insight and just be real with you too, because a lot of people will give you the whole sunshine and rainbows talk, right? Where, I'm so blessed to be doing what I love. I can't imagine doing anything else. Everything works out in life. I mean, it's hard work. It doesn't just happen. There are struggles. Nobody doesn't go through the struggles. There are obstacles. There are sacrifices. There's a roller coaster of emotions. There's questioning your career multiple times throughout the process. So I think it's important to kind of share that part of things with people too, so you don't go into it expecting everything to be sunshine and rainbows, but knowing that there are challenges, and yes, I do think it's worth it, but you have to know that it comes with its own set of challenges every step of the way.